I turned my key in the front door of the Toronto townhouse I'd bought for my daughter 15 years ago, my heart racing with excitement. But before I could call out her name, I heard a man's voice slice through the silence like a knife. If that kitchen isn't spotless in 10 minutes, you'll spend the night in the basement again. I froze in the doorway. Through the hall, I saw my Emma on her hands and knees scrubbing tile grout with a toothbrush, wearing a stained gray uniform with Thornton Estate staff embroidered across the back. My daughter, my brilliant, confident Emma who'd graduated top of her class from the University of Toronto. Reduced to this. My name is Robert Morrison, and this is the story of how I came home from 12 years working oil rigs in the North Sea, only to discover my daughter had become a prisoner in her own home. Before I share what happened next, I'd love to know where you're watching this from. Drop your location in the comments. I'm curious if you're having your morning coffee in Vancouver, your lunch break in Halifax, or winding down for the evening somewhere across this beautiful country of ours. The flight from Aberdeen to Toronto had taken 9 hours, but those hours felt like nothing compared to the 12 years I'd spent away. 12 years of brutal North Sea winters, of missing birthdays and Christmases, of video calls that never quite captured the warmth of a real hug. But every day of that sacrifice had been for Emma and her 5-year-old daughter, Sophie, my granddaughter I'd only met through a screen. The taxi pulled up to the familiar red brick townhouse on Roncesvalles Avenue. Same black shutters, same maple tree in the front yard where Emma used to read books every summer afternoon. This house was my gift to her before I left for Scotland, my way of ensuring she'd always have security, always have a home to call her own. I stood on the sidewalk with my single worn duffel bag, hands trembling as I pulled out the key Emma didn't know I still had. This was meant to be the surprise of a lifetime. I'd saved every possible dollar, lived in cramped quarters with 5 other roughnecks, all so I could retire early and finally be the father and grandfather I should have been. The door swung open silently. I stepped into the foyer, grinning like a fool as I prepared to shout, "Surprise!" But that word died in my throat when I heard the cold male voice from the kitchen. If that kitchen isn't spotless in 10 minutes, you'll spend the night in the basement again. My blood turned to ice water in my veins. I moved quietly through the hallway, my boots silent on the hardwood I'd helped install before leaving for Aberdeen. The kitchen came into view, and what I saw made my stomach drop like I'd been punched. Emma was on her hands and knees on the white tile floor, scrubbing at invisible dirt with a toothbrush. Her dark hair, once always styled perfectly, hung limp and unwashed around her face. She wore a gray housekeeping uniform that was 2 sizes too large, the words Thornton Estate staff embroidered in gold thread across the back like she was branded property. Standing over her was a man I'd only seen in photos, Marcus Thornton, Emma's husband. In the wedding pictures she'd sent me 3 years ago, he'd looked kind, successful in his tailored suit. The man before me now was unrecognizable. His face was twisted in disgust as he watched my daughter scrub. "Pathetic," he spat. "My mother was right about you. Common trash pretending to be something you're not." Emma's hands shook as she worked, but she didn't respond. Didn't defend herself. That's when I noticed the bruises. Dark purple marks circling her wrists like handcuffs. A yellow-green shadow along her jaw, partially hidden by her hair. My vision went red. "Emma," I said, my voice coming out strangled. They both spun around. Marcus's expression of cruel satisfaction transformed instantly into a broad smile, like flipping a switch. He strode toward me with his hand extended, every inch the charming son-in-law from the photographs. "Robert, what an incredible surprise." His voice was warm, welcoming. "Emma, look who's here! Your father's come home!" Emma scrambled to her feet, yanking off the degrading uniform shirt to reveal a plain t-shirt underneath. She shoved the gray shirt behind the refrigerator with frantic movements, her eyes darting between Marcus and me like a trapped animal. "Dad," she said, forcing a smile that made my heart break, "I didn't know you were coming." Before I could respond, a small figure appeared in the kitchen doorway. Sophie, 5 years old, with Emma's dark curls and eyes that were studying me with cautious curiosity. "Mommy," she whispered, "who is that man?" The words hit me like a sledgehammer to the chest. Despite our video calls, despite the birthday cards I'd sent with money tucked inside, I was still essentially a stranger to my own granddaughter. I crouched down to her level, my knees protesting after the long flight. "Hey there, sweetheart. I'm your grandpa Robert. I've been working far away, but I'm here now. I've been looking forward to meeting you in person for so long." Sophie buried her face against Emma's leg, overwhelmed. Emma placed a protective hand on her daughter's head, and that's when I saw it clearly. The bruise on her jaw, the way she held her left arm stiffly, like her ribs hurt. The dark circles under her eyes that spoke of too many sleepless nights. "Emma," I started, but she cut me off with a look that screamed, "Not now, not in front of Sophie." Marcus clapped my shoulder with practiced familiarity, but I felt the warning in his grip. "She's been working so hard lately, you know how women are. Always overdoing it with the housework, then complaining about being tired." He laughed, and the sound made my skin crawl. Something was deeply, terribly wrong. The confident young woman I'd left behind had been replaced by this frightened stranger who flinched at her own husband's touch. My granddaughter, who should have been running into my arms, cowered instead. I needed to find out what had happened to my family. And I had a sinking feeling that the truth would be far worse than I could imagine. 4 hours later, Marcus left for what he called a business meeting, though the whiskey on his breath at 2 in the afternoon told a different story. The moment his BMW pulled out of the driveway, the entire house seemed to exhale. Sophie was down for her nap, and Emma sat at the kitchen table staring at her hands like they belonged to someone else. In the afternoon, light streaming through the window, the extent of her injuries became impossible to ignore. Not just the obvious bruises, but the way she held herself. Smaller, diminished, like she was trying to take up as little space as possible. "Emma," I said gently, pulling up a chair beside her, "tell me about those bruises. And don't say you're clumsy. I taught you how to skate when you were 4 years old. You were the most coordinated kid I ever knew." Her facade cracked. She wrapped her arms around herself protectively, and I noticed the burn marks on her forearms. Circular, deliberate, cigarette burns. "Dad, I messed everything up." Her voice broke. "After Sophie was born, I got really sick. Postpartum depression, the doctor called it. I couldn't get out of bed some days, couldn't take care of Sophie. I was terrified I'd hurt her by accident because I couldn't think straight." She wiped her nose with the back of her hand. "Marcus's family said they'd help. They moved in temporarily to take care of Sophie while I recovered. I was on so much medication, Dad. Antidepressants, anti-anxiety pills, sleeping pills because I couldn't rest. Everything was foggy all the time. My hands clenched into fists on the table. They kept bringing me papers to sign. Insurance forms, they said. Medical authorizations, power of attorney documents, so they could make healthcare decisions if I was too ill. I signed everything they put in front of me, because I trusted them, because I thought they were helping." She looked around the kitchen that should have been hers, tears streaming down her face. When the fog finally lifted and I could think clearly again, they told me what I'd signed: property transfer documents. An employment contract making me their live-in housekeeper, working without pay to compensate them for the care they'd provided during my illness. Her voice dropped to a whisper. They said I'd signed over the house, that I now worked for the Thornton family. Rage built inside me unlike anything I'd ever experienced. These people had preyed on my daughter at her most vulnerable moment, when she was sick and terrified and alone. "They threatened me," Emma continued, her whole body shaking. "Said if I tried to leave or went to the police, they'd prove I was an unfit mother and take Sophie away. They have lawyers, Dad. Expensive ones. And Marcus's father knows judges. So I stayed. I've been their servant in my own home for 3 years." She walked to a drawer and pulled out a thick folder, her hands trembling as she handed it to me. "I kept everything. Medical records, the papers I signed, text messages. I kept hoping that someday someone would help me understand what really happened. Help me fight back." As I opened that folder and began reading through the documents, one thought crystallized with absolute clarity. The Thornton family had made the biggest mistake of their lives when they decided to mess with Robert Morrison's daughter. That night, I spread Emma's medical records across the kitchen table like a detective working a case. What I found made my blood run cold. The dates told a story of systematic exploitation that was even worse than I'd imagined. Emma had signed the property transfer documents on September 18th. According to her medical chart from Mount Sinai Hospital, September 18th was also the day her psychiatrist had increased her medication dosage to the maximum therapeutic level due to a severe depressive episode. Her chart notes described her as significantly impaired, requires supervision for basic activities. The next morning, I drove straight to Mount Sinai. Dr. Sarah Chen, Emma's former psychiatrist, agreed to meet with me after I explained the situation. Her office overlooked University Avenue, the CN Tower, visible through the window behind her desk. "Mr. Morrison," Dr. Chen said, pulling Emma's file from her cabinet, "I remember your daughter very well. Her case was one of the most severe postpartum depression episodes I've treated in 15 years of practice." She flipped through pages of detailed notes, her expression growing increasingly troubled. During September of that year, Emma was barely functional. We had her on sertraline, lorazepam, and quetiapine. That's a heavy medication regimen that severely impairs cognitive function and decision-making ability. "What does that mean in practical terms?" I asked, though I already dreaded the answer. "It means she was in no condition to make any legal decisions whatsoever. The medication levels we prescribed would have left her confused, disoriented, and highly suggestible. Mr. Morrison, she shouldn't have been signing birthday cards, let alone property transfer documents." Dr. Chen called in Rachel Thompson, the nurse who had worked most closely with Emma during her treatment. Rachel was a woman in her 40s with kind eyes that hardened when she heard what had happened. "Oh my God," Rachel said, shaking her head. "I remember those days clearly. Emma was so heavily medicated that some days she couldn't recognize her own reflection in the mirror. She would stare at people like she was looking through thick fog. I specifically remember one afternoon," Rachel continued, "when she tried to sign her name on a form for us. Her handwriting was so shaky and illegible that I had to guide her hand. There's absolutely no way she could have understood complex legal documents." "Doctor," Chen pulled out Emma's medication log, pointing at the dates with her pen. "Look at this timeline, Mr. Morrison. September 15th through September 25th was her absolute worst period. We were seriously considering hospitalization because she was barely responsive to verbal commands. And they had her sign legal papers during this time?" My voice was tight with barely controlled rage. "If what you're telling me is true, Doctor," Chen said firmly, "then what they did wasn't just morally reprehensible. It was legally invalid. A person under this level of psychiatric medication cannot give informed consent for anything, especially something as significant as property transfer." Rachel nodded emphatically. "I would testify to that in court, Mr. Morrison. Emma couldn't have understood what day of the week it was during that period, let alone the implications of signing away her house." "Doctor," Chen printed out a comprehensive summary of Emma's treatment during that period and handed it to me. "Mr. Morrison, those signatures are legally worthless. No court in this country would uphold contracts signed by someone in Emma's condition. What the Thornton family did constitutes elder abuse and exploitation of a vulnerable person under Canadian law." As I left the hospital with that medical summary in my hands, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Hope. Real, genuine hope. For the first time since I'd walked through that front door, I knew we had a real chance to fight back. The Thornton family thought they were clever, preying on a sick woman, but they just handed me the ammunition I needed to destroy them. Armed with Dr. Chen's medical summary, I knew we needed legal help, professional help. A quick internet search led me to the law offices of Catherine Walsh and Associates, specialists in elder abuse and exploitation cases. Catherine had a reputation for taking down powerful families who preyed on vulnerable people. Her office occupied the 20th floor of a glass tower on Bay Street, with panoramic views of Lake Ontario. Catherine herself was a woman in her mid-50s, with silver hair cut in a sharp bob and eyes that missed absolutely nothing. "Mr. Morrison," she said, gesturing to a leather chair across from her desk, "tell me about your daughter's situation. Don't leave out any details, no matter how small they might seem." I laid out everything. The degrading uniform, Emma's postpartum depression, the suspicious timing of the document signings, and Dr. Chen's medical assessment. Catherine took notes on her laptop, occasionally asking pointed questions about dates, witnesses, and specific details. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair, her fingers steepled under her chin. Mr. Morrison, this is textbook exploitation of a vulnerable person. What the Thornton family did isn't just morally despicable. It's a criminal offense under Canadian law. She pulled up Emma's medical records on her screen, cross-referencing them with photocopies of the property transfer documents I'd brought. Look at this timeline. Your daughter signed away a $600,000 property while she was so heavily medicated she couldn't recognize her own face. Any first-year law student could get these contracts voided. But here's what makes this case special, Catherine continued, her voice taking on a predatory edge. The Thornton family didn't just commit fraud, they created a pattern of ongoing abuse. Forcing Emma to wear that uniform, making her work as an unpaid servant, threatening to take away her child. That's human trafficking, Mr. Morrison. That's forcible confinement. Those are federal offenses. My heart pounded, as the full scope of what had happened to Emma became clear. What can we do about it? We're not just getting your daughter's house back, Catherine said firmly. We're sending the Thornton family to federal prison. But we need to be strategic about this. She pulled up a new document on her screen and began outlining our plan. Step 1. We give them 48 hours to voluntarily return the property and pay damages. Sometimes families get scared and settle when they realize they're caught. Step 2. If they refuse, we file both civil and criminal complaints simultaneously. Civil suit to recover the house and damages. Criminal referral to the RCMP for human trafficking and exploitation charges. Step 3. We contact the Toronto Star. Public pressure can be incredibly effective, especially against families who care about their social standing in the Toronto business community. And step 4? I asked. Catherine smiled, and it wasn't a pleasant expression. Step 4 is when we destroy them completely. Asset forfeiture, prison sentences, and civil judgments that will bankrupt them for generations. She stood and extended her hand. Mr. Morrison, I've been practicing law for 25 years, and I've never seen a case with stronger evidence. The Thornton family picked the wrong victim when they targeted your daughter. What do we do first? I asked, shaking her hand. Tomorrow morning, you and I are going to pay them a visit at their Rosedale mansion. We'll give them a chance to surrender peacefully. If they're smart, they'll take it. Her eyes glittered with anticipation. If they're not, well, we'll teach them what happens when you mess with Robert Morrison's family. Walking out of that office, I felt more powerful than I had in years. The Thornton family was about to discover that their biggest mistake wasn't just exploiting my daughter. It was doing it while her father was still alive and ready to fight back. The next morning, Catherine and I drove through the tree-lined streets of Rosedale, one of Toronto's most exclusive neighborhoods. The Thornton mansion loomed before us, a massive limestone structure with towering columns, displaying wealth built on the suffering of others. A uniformed butler led us through marble hallways lined with oil paintings. Everything about this place screamed old money and privilege. Richard Thornton, Marcus's father, waited in his wood-paneled study, seated behind a massive mahogany desk. He was 70-something, with silver hair and the soft features of someone who'd never worked a real day in his life. Mr. Morrison, he said without rising, his voice dripping with condescension. I understand you have concerns about your daughter's living arrangements. Living arrangements? I said, my rage barely controlled. You mean enslaving her in her own home? Richard laughed, a cold sound that made my hands ball into fists. You're nobody, Morrison. My family has been part of Toronto's business elite for 4 generations. We have connections with judges, police chiefs, and politicians. You think one washed-up oil worker can threaten us? Catherine stepped forward calmly, placing a thick folder on his desk. Mr. Thornton, I'm attorney Catherine Walsh. These are your daughter-in-law's medical records from Mount Sinai Hospital, along with expert testimony from her psychiatrist and attending nurse. She opened the folder with precise movements. On September 18th, Emma signed property documents while under maximum dose psychiatric medications. Dr. Sarah Chen states that Emma was so heavily medicated she couldn't recognize her own reflection. She was in no condition to sign anything. Richard barely glanced at the documents. Emma signed voluntarily. We have witnesses. You exploited my daughter's mental illness, I leaned forward. That's a federal crime, Thornton. Human trafficking. Exploitation of a vulnerable person. Fraud. The RCMP will have a field day with this. Something flickered in Richard's eyes. Uncertainty. He picked up the medical records, his confident facade cracking as he read Dr. Chen's detailed assessment. This is ridiculous, he blustered, but his voice lacked conviction. Emma needed help. We provided it. She's grateful for what we've done. Catherine's smile was razor sharp. Grateful? Is that why she wears a uniform that says Thornton Estate Staff? Why your son threatens to beat her? Why she sleeps in a basement room while you live in luxury in her house? Richard's face flushed red. How dare you come into my home making these accusations? I'll have you disbarred for harassment. Please do try, Catherine said smoothly. I'd love to explain to the Law Society of Ontario how your family held a mentally ill woman as an unpaid servant for 3 years. The media coverage alone would be fascinating. Marcus burst through the study door, his face twisted with rage. Dad, why are we even talking to these people? Let me handle this the way we handle all our problems. Catherine didn't flinch at the implied threat. Mr. Thornton, you have 48 hours to return Emma's property and pay $1 million in damages. If you refuse, we file civil and criminal complaints with the Ontario Superior Court and the RCMP. Richard stood slowly, hands shaking with fury. You just declared war on the wrong family, Morrison. We will destroy you and that pathetic daughter of yours. You already tried, I said, standing to face him. But you made one crucial mistake. You left me alive to fight back. As we walked out, Catherine squeezed my arm. Perfect. They just made threats in front of witnesses. Now we have intimidation charges too. The Thornton family had 48 hours to surrender. Something told me they were too arrogant to take the offer. 47 hours later, the Thornton family's silence gave Catherine all the answers she needed. The Toronto Star's front-page headline screamed, Wealthy Rosedale family exploits daughter-in-law's mental illness to steal home. The article, written by investigative journalist David Sullivan, laid out every damning detail. Emma's medical records, the suspicious timing of the property transfer, and the degrading treatment she'd endured for 3 years. The accompanying photo showed our modest Roncesvalles townhouse next to the Thornton mansion, a visual David versus Goliath that captured everything. Within hours, the story exploded across social media. Justice for Emma began trending on Twitter across Canada, with thousands sharing their own stories of elder abuse and exploitation. Local news stations picked up the story, camping outside both our townhouse and the Thornton estate. My neighbor, Mrs. Kowalski, knocked on our door that afternoon with a casserole and tears in her eyes. Robert, I had no idea what Emma was going through. The whole neighborhood is talking about it. Everyone wants to help. The outpouring of support was overwhelming. A GoFundMe page appeared overnight, raising money for Emma's legal expenses, though we didn't need it. The Toronto Women's Shelter offered free counseling services. Strangers stopped me on the street to express their outrage at what the Thornton family had done. But the real victory came at 3 that afternoon, when Catherine called with news that made my heart soar. Robert, get down to the courthouse immediately, she said, barely containing her excitement. Justice Margaret Harrison just granted our emergency injunction. Emma gets her house back today. At the Ontario Superior Court of Justice, Justice Harrison's voice rang with authority as she addressed the packed courtroom. Based on the medical evidence presented, it is abundantly clear that Miss Emma Morrison Thornton was not competent to sign these documents. The property transfer is hereby declared null and void, effective immediately. The Thornton family's high-priced lawyers looked stunned. Richard Thornton's face turned purple with rage, while Marcus had to be physically restrained by court security when he started shouting threats. Furthermore, Justice Harrison continued, I am granting a restraining order. The Thornton family is prohibited from contacting or approaching Miss Morrison or her family. Violation of this order will result in immediate arrest. 3 hours later, I watched from our front porch as Toronto police officers escorted Emma and Sophie home. Emma carried a single suitcase, everything the Thornton family had allowed her to keep from her old life. Sophie clutched a worn stuffed rabbit, her eyes wide with confusion about why police officers were helping them. Mommy, Sophie whispered as they walked up the front steps. Are we really going to live here now? Yes, sweetheart, Emma said, her voice breaking with emotion. We're home. We're finally home. That evening, as we sat around the kitchen table eating Mrs. Kowalski's pierogies, my phone rang. The caller ID showed Marcus's number. "Answer it," Catherine advised over speakerphone, "but put it on speaker so I can record it. Let's see how stupid he really is." I put the call on speaker. Marcus's voice was slurred with alcohol and rage. "This isn't over, old man. You think you've won? We will destroy all of you. My family has connections you can't imagine. You have no idea what we're capable of." "Are you threatening my family, Marcus?" I asked calmly. "I'm promising you," Marcus snarled. "Enjoy your little victory while it lasts. Soon you'll wish you'd never come back from Scotland." The line went dead. Catherine's voice came through the speaker, grimly satisfied. "Congratulations, Robert. He just handed us another felony charge. Uttering threats is a criminal offense in Canada." That night, as Emma tucked Sophie into her own bedroom for the first time in 3 years, I felt something I hadn't experienced since walking through that door a week ago. Hope. Real, genuine hope for the future. But Marcus's threats echoed in my mind. This battle was won, but I had a sinking feeling the war was far from over. The first week back in our house felt like we were all learning to breathe again. Every morning I woke up to Sophie's laughter echoing through the hallways, a sound these walls had been missing for far too long. Emma moved through the rooms like someone rediscovering a language she'd forgotten, pausing in doorways, running her fingers along familiar surfaces as memories of happier times flooded back. "Dad," she said one morning, finding me making pancakes in the kitchen, "I forgot what coffee tastes like when you're not terrified someone's going to scream at you for taking too long to drink it." Sophie slowly warmed up to me. Her shyness melted as she realized I wasn't leaving again. The breakthrough came on Tuesday afternoon when I found her struggling with a bicycle that was clearly too small for her growing legs. "Need help there, sweetheart?" I asked, crouching beside her. She looked up with Emma's eyes, full of determination and frustration. "I want to ride like the big kids at the park, but my bike is too baby." That afternoon we went to Canadian Tire and bought a bright purple bicycle with training wheels and streamers on the handlebars. Watching Sophie's face light up as she pedaled around our driveway was worth every sleepless night I'd spent on those North Sea oil rigs. I threw myself into fixing the neglected house. Loose floorboards, leaky faucets, peeling paint. Small projects that kept my hands busy while I watched my family heal. Emma surprised me by joining in. Together, we repainted Sophie's bedroom, a soft lavender, hung new curtains, and planted tulip bulbs in the front garden for next spring. "Remember when you taught me to use a drill?" Emma asked one evening as we assembled Sophie's new bookshelf. "I was 12, and Mom was convinced I'd put a hole through the wall." "You did put a hole through the wall," I laughed. 3 holes, actually. "Your mother made me sleep on the couch for a week." Evenings became precious. Real family meals with conversation and laughter instead of tense silence. Sophie would chatter about her day at kindergarten, showing me drawings or asking me to read her favorite story about a brave little girl who climbed a mountain. "Grandpa," she said one night, the word rolling off her tongue naturally, "now, will you read me the mountain story again?" My chest tightened with emotion. "Of course, sweetheart. As many times as you want." Emma caught my eye across the room and smiled. A real smile. Not the forced expression from when I first arrived. "Dad," she whispered later while we cleaned dishes, "I forgot what happiness felt like. Thank you for giving it back to us." For 10 days, we lived in this bubble of contentment. Sophie called me Grandpa regularly. Emma's bruises faded, and the haunted look in her eyes began disappearing. We were becoming a real family again, healing together. But Thursday night, as I tucked Sophie into bed, my phone rang. The caller ID showed an unfamiliar local number. "Don't answer it," Emma said, appearing in the doorway with worry etched across her face. But I answered anyway. Marcus's voice was cold and sober this time, more frightening than his drunken rage. "Enjoying your little family reunion, old man? Don't get too comfortable. Some storms you can't see coming until they're right on top of you." The line went dead, leaving me staring at the phone while Sophie asked, "Grandpa, who was that? You look scared." I forced a smile and kissed her forehead. "Nobody important, sweetheart, just a wrong number." But as I turned off her bedroom light, I couldn't shake the feeling that our peaceful days were numbered. 2 nights later, a violent thunderstorm rolled across Toronto, rattling our windows and sending sheets of rain against the house. I was lying in bed listening to the wind howl when I heard something that didn't belong to the storm. Footsteps on our front porch. Slow, deliberate, purposeful. I slipped out of bed and peered through the bedroom curtains. Lightning illuminated a figure moving around the perimeter of our house, carrying what looked like a jerry can. The acrid smell of gasoline began seeping through the walls, burning my nostrils. Marcus had come to make good on his promise. I grabbed my phone and dialed 911 as I ran down the hallway. "There's someone with gasoline trying to burn down my house on Roncesvalles Avenue," I whispered urgently to the dispatcher. "Please, hurry." "Sir, we're dispatching units immediately. Get your family out of the house now." But before I could reach Emma's room, I heard the whoosh of flames igniting outside. Orange light flickered through the living room windows as fire raced around the foundation of our townhouse. Marcus's voice rose above the storm, screaming like a man who'd lost his mind. "You destroyed my family. Now I'll destroy yours. Burn it all down." I burst into Emma's bedroom, shaking her awake. "Emma, we have to go now. The house is on fire." She bolted upright, instantly alert. "Sophie?" We ran to Sophie's room together. She was already awake, sitting up in bed crying as smoke began seeping under her door. The hallway was filling with thick black smoke that burned our lungs and stung our eyes. "Mommy, I'm scared," Sophie sobbed as Emma scooped her up. "I know, baby. Grandpa's gonna get us out of here." The front door was blocked by flames, so I led them toward the back of the house. But as we reached the kitchen, Marcus appeared at the sliding glass door, his face twisted with rage and illuminated by the fire he'd set. He was holding a crowbar, his eyes wild and unfocused. "Nobody leaves," he screamed, smashing the glass. "If I can't have my perfect life, nobody gets to have theirs." I pushed Emma and Sophie behind me, grabbing a kitchen knife from the counter. "Emma, take Sophie and get out through the dining room window. Go now." "I'm not leaving you," Emma cried. "Go," I roared. "Protect Sophie." Marcus swung the crowbar at my head, but rage had made him sloppy. I ducked under the wild swing and tackled him around the waist, sending us both crashing into the kitchen cabinets. The knife skittered across the floor as we grappled, smoke filling the room around us. "You want to hurt my family?" I gasped, fighting for leverage as smoke choked my lungs. "You'll have to go through me first." Marcus was younger, but I had 12 years of hard physical labor and 40 years of suppressed fury driving me. Every missed birthday, every Christmas I'd spent alone on an oil rig, every tear Emma had shed, it all poured into my fists as we fought. The sound of sirens cut through the storm just as I managed to pin Marcus to the floor, my knee on his back. Through the broken sliding door, I could see flashing red and blue lights as fire trucks and police cars flooded our street. "Toronto police! Everyone out of the house now!" I dragged the semi-conscious Marcus toward the back door. As firefighters burst through the front entrance, their hoses already spraying water on the flames, consuming our home. Outside in the rain, I found Emma and Sophie huddled together on Mrs. Kowalski's lawn, both safe but shaking with terror and shock. Sophie broke free and ran to me the moment she saw me emerge from the smoke. "Grandpa, I thought you were gone." I dropped to my knees and pulled both of them into my arms as paramedics rushed over to check us for smoke inhalation. Police officers were handcuffing Marcus, reading him his rights as he struggled weakly. Our townhouse was damaged, black scorch marks climbing the exterior walls, but still standing. The fire department had arrived just in time to prevent total destruction. "It's over," I whispered into Emma's hair as we watched them load Marcus into a police car. "He can never hurt you again." 6 months later, I sat in the Ontario Superior Court of Justice, watching Justice Margaret Harrison deliver the final chapter of our story. The courtroom was packed with supporters who had followed our case from the beginning, people who believed that justice mattered. Marcus sat at the defendant's table in an orange jumpsuit, his arrogance replaced by the hollow stare of a broken man facing the consequences of his actions. "Mr. Marcus Thornton," Justice Harrison said with absolute authority, "you have been found guilty of arson, attempted murder, assault, forcible confinement, and conspiracy to commit fraud. I hereby sentence you to 14 years in federal prison without parole." The gavel came down with satisfying finality. Marcus didn't flinch as bailiffs led him away in shackles. 2 weeks earlier, Richard Thornton had been sentenced to 10 years for exploitation of a vulnerable person, fraud, conspiracy, and attempting to obstruct justice. The Thornton business empire had crumbled overnight. Assets frozen, properties seized, their name now synonymous with shame in Toronto's business community. The court-ordered restitution was substantial. The Thornton family was ordered to pay $2.5 million in damages. Compensation for the stolen house, Emma's unpaid labor, emotional trauma, Sophie's suffering, and fire damage. Their Rosedale mansion, cars, and business assets were liquidated to pay what they owed us. Catherine squeezed my hand. "It's over, Robert. They can never hurt anyone again." We used the money to rebuild and renovate from the ground up. The townhouse had bigger windows now, a modern kitchen, and a spacious bedroom for Sophie with built-in bookshelves. I had moved my belongings from Aberdeen permanently because I wasn't going anywhere ever again. "Dad," Emma had said when I announced I was staying in Toronto for good, "are you sure? You worked so hard for so many years." "My life isn't on oil rigs anymore," I'd replied. "My life is wherever my family is." The best addition was Sophie's backyard play structure with a swing set, slide, and sandbox. Every evening after dinner, I'd push her on the swings while Emma tended her growing flower garden. "Higher, Grandpa!" Sophie would squeal, her laughter echoing across the neighborhood. At 6 years old, Sophie had grown into a confident, joyful child who knew she was loved and protected. She called me Grandpa like it was the most natural thing in the world, and insisted I read her the mountain story every single night. Emma had blossomed too. The haunted look was completely gone, replaced by the spark of the strong woman I had raised. She'd started taking online courses in social work, working toward a degree. "I want to help other women who've been through what I experienced," she told me one evening. "Show them there's always hope, that they're not alone, that someone will fight for them." This evening, as I pushed Sophie on her swing, Emma came out carrying 3 glasses of lemonade. She sat on the porch steps watching us with a radiant smile, the kind of smile I hadn't seen since before I left for Scotland all those years ago. "Grandpa," Sophie said, slowing her swing to look at me seriously, "will you live with us forever and always?" I caught the swing and knelt to her level, looking into those brown eyes so much like her mother's. "Forever and always, sweetheart. Wild horses couldn't drag me away." "Dad," Emma called from the porch, her voice thick with emotion. "Thank you for saving us. Thank you for never giving up. Thank you for coming home." As the sun set over Toronto and Sophie ran off to chase fireflies in the garden, I realized that this moment, this perfect ordinary evening with my family, was worth more than all those years in Scotland, worth more than any amount of money. Looking back on this journey, I realized how close I came to losing everything that truly mattered. For 12 years, I chased financial security while my daughter suffered in silence, unable to reach out for help. Don't make my mistake. Don't let career ambitions blind you to your family's pain. This true story taught me that sometimes God has a way of bringing us home exactly when we're needed most. I believe there was divine intervention in my timing, walking through that door the very day I could still make a difference. The good Lord guided me back to Toronto at precisely the right moment, just as He guides all of us through our darkest hours. The Thornton family thought they could exploit a vulnerable woman without consequences. But they forgot that justice, though sometimes slow, is always inevitable. They forgot that a father's love is a force stronger than money or power or connections. Emma's strength during those 3 terrible years showed me that the human spirit can endure unimaginable hardship. Her courage in keeping those medical records, in holding on to hope when everything seemed hopeless, that's what saved us in the end. If you're working far from home tonight, remember that no amount of money can replace the moments you miss with your children and grandchildren. Success means nothing if your family is suffering while you're away. This true story could have ended very differently if I had arrived even a few weeks later. The greatest blessing wasn't the court victory or the restored house, or even the compensation money. The greatest blessing was Sophie calling me Grandpa with genuine love in her voice, was seeing Emma smile again, was knowing I'd been there when my family needed me most. That's why I share this story, to inspire other fathers and grandfathers to prioritize what truly matters. Don't wait for a crisis to bring you home. Don't assume your loved ones are okay just because they don't complain. And never underestimate the power of a parent's love to move mountains when their child needs them. This true story changed all our lives forever. Emma found her strength again. Sophie learned she was protected and loved, and I discovered that home isn't a place or a house or even a city. Home is the people who love you unconditionally, who fight for you, who refuse to give up on you no matter what. If this story touched your heart, please share your own family experiences in the comments below. Where in Canada are you watching this from? Have you ever had to fight for someone you love? Your story might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to Shattered Vengeance for more true stories about family, justice, and the unbreakable bonds that hold us together, even in our darkest moments. Because sometimes the most powerful stories are the ones that remind us we're not alone in our struggles. And remember, it's never too late to fight for the people you love. It's never too late to come home. It's never too late to be the person your family needs you to be. Thank you for listening to our story. May you never need to walk this path, but if you do, may you find the courage to fight back just like we did.